What happens when a man who once laughed his way into America's living rooms walks back onto daytime television, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments, and finds himself face to face with one of the few people unafraid to challenge him publicly? What happens when smiles tighten, applause hesitates, and a single question turns the air electric? Before we go any further, if you love intense, cinematic celebrity stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Stage View right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The studio lights of The View glow warmer than usual that morning, bouncing off polished floors and pastel panels designed to soothe, not provoke. The audience buzzes with a nervous kind of excitement, the kind that crackles just beneath polite applause. Producers exchange glances behind the cameras. Everyone knows this isn't just another celebrity sit-down. Will Smith steps out from behind the curtain. He's smiling. Of course he is. That familiar, practiced smile. The one that once felt effortless, infectious, almost invincible. But today it lands differently. It's slower, heavier, like it's carrying something it hasn't fully set down yet. The applause rises, but it's uneven. Some people clap hard, eager, loyal. Others hesitate, their hands coming together a beat late, as if checking the room first. Will hears it. He always hears it. He waves, nods, mouths a quiet thank you. And for just a flicker of a second, his eyes scan the audience, not searching for approval, but bracing for impact. At the table, Whoopi Goldberg watches him approach. She doesn't smile right away. Whoopi has been on this stage for decades. She's seen scandals flare and fade, careers crash and resurrect themselves. She's defended friends and dismantled narratives with the same calm authority. Today, she sits back in her chair, hands folded, eyes steady. Not hostile. Not warm. Just ready. Will takes his seat. The chair squeaks softly, a sound that feels louder than it should. The co-hosts exchange polite greetings, voices light, almost too light, like everyone's collectively tiptoeing around a fault line. So Will, one of them begins, easing in. It's been a while since we've seen you on daytime TV. Will chuckles, a quick release of tension. Yeah, he says. It has. Life's been life. The audience laughs. The ice cracks just a little. They talk about his new project first. Of course they do. The safe stuff. Redemption through art. Healing through storytelling. Will speaks smoothly, passionately, his hands moving as he explains how this role changed him, how it forced him to look inward. I had to ask myself some hard questions, he says. About who I am when the cameras are off. Whoopi nods slowly. Still quiet. The conversation flows, but there's a current beneath it, an unspoken agreement that this is all prelude. Everyone knows why he's really here. The audience knows. The hosts know. Will knows. And then Whoopi leans forward. It's subtle, but the energy shifts instantly. Will, she says, her voice calm, grounded, unmistakably serious. You've talked about growth, about reflection. But there are people watching right now who still feel hurt, confused. Some even feel betrayed. The applause doesn't come this time. The silence stretches. Will blinks once. His smile tightens. I understand that, he replies carefully. I really do. And I've taken responsibility. Whoopi raises a hand, not aggressively, but firmly. I'm not talking about statements, she says. I'm talking about accountability in a deeper sense. Not the kind you say in interviews. The kind you live with. A murmur ripples through the audience. Will shifts in his chair. You can almost see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This isn't an attack, but it's not a pass either. I live with it every day, he says, his voice lower now. I replay it. I think about what I should have done differently. I know I disappointed people. But do you understand why? Whoopi asks. Not just that it happened, but what it represented. That's the moment. The temperature in the room changes. The cameras seem to inch closer, catching every micro-expression. Will's jaw flexes. He exhales slowly through his nose. With respect, Whoopi, he says, choosing his words like glass, I don't think anyone can fully understand my mental state in that moment except me. A few gasps. A few nods. Someone in the audience whispers. Oh. Whoopi doesn't flinch. That may be true, she replies evenly. But when your actions ripple out to millions, your mental state doesn't exist in a vacuum. The words hang there. Will leans back, crossing his arms briefly before stopping himself, uncrossing them, placing his hands flat on the table instead. It's a small thing, but it betrays his tension. I'm not asking for excuses, he says. I'm asking for space to be human. And people are asking for reassurance, Whoopi counters. That the man they admired understands the responsibility that came with that admiration. Applause breaks out, this time louder, more decisive. Will nods slowly, but his eyes glisten now, not quite tears, but close enough that the audience leans in collectively, like they're afraid to miss the moment everything breaks. I've spent my whole life trying to be worthy of that admiration, he says quietly. And yeah, I failed. Publicly. Spectacularly. A nervous laugh escapes the crowd. Will doesn't laugh with them. But what hurts, he continues, his voice tightening, is feeling like that one moment erased decades of who I've been. Whoopi's expression softens, but only slightly. No one's saying it erased everything, she says. But it did change the conversation. And you don't get to decide how people process that change. For a heartbeat, it looks like Will might push back harder. His lips part. He inhales. The studio feels suspended, like it's holding its breath with him. Then he stops. You're right, he says. The words land heavier than any defense could have. The audience reacts instantly. Some applaud, others sigh. A few shake their heads as if still unconvinced. Will stares down at the table for a second too long, then looks back up, eyes locked on Whoopi. I don't get to control that, he admits. All I can do is keep showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. Whoopi studies him, not as a host now, but as someone who's lived through her own storms. Showing up is the start, she says, not the finish line. The camera cuts to Will's face. The smile is gone now. In its place is something rawer, more exposed. And as the segment break music begins to swell, the audience senses it too. This wasn't closure. It was the opening of something far messier, something unfinished. And as the lights dim just slightly for the transition, one thing becomes painfully clear. This conversation is far from over. The break ends, and when the lights surge back to full brightness, the room feels different, like everyone has aged a year in those 2 quiet minutes off air. Will Smith sits straighter now. The easy looseness he walked in with has evaporated. His hands are clasped together, fingers interlocked so tightly the knuckles have gone pale. Across from him, Whoopi Goldberg adjusts her glasses, calm as ever, but her gaze is sharper now, more focused. This isn't small talk territory anymore. This is the part people remember. The applause cue flashes, and the audience responds, but it's thinner this time. Polite. Cautious. So, one of the co-hosts says, trying to lighten the moment, we're talking about accountability, growth. Whoopi lifts a finger slightly. Not dismissive. Decisive. I want to stay right here for a second, she says. The co-host nods and leans back. Everyone yields to Whoopi without a word. This is her lane. Will, Whoopi continues. You said something important before the break. You said you feel like one moment erased decades of who you've been. Will nods once. Slowly. I want to ask you something, she says. And I want you to sit with it before you answer. A hush sweeps over the audience. Even the rustle of clothing stops. When you think about that night, Whoopi says, do you think people were more shocked by what you did or by who did it? The question lands like a weight. Will opens his mouth, then closes it again. He looks out at the audience, not really seeing them. His jaw tightens. His throat moves as he swallows. I think, he begins, then stops. A small, humorless smile flickers across his face. I think they were shocked because it was me. A ripple moves through the crowd. A few quiet mess. Someone exhales loudly. Because I was supposed to be better than that, Will adds. I built my brand on being the safe guy. The fun guy. The guy you let into your home with your kids. Whoopi nods. Exactly. Will leans forward now, elbows on the table, as if proximity might help him bridge the gap between intention and impact. And that's the thing, he says. People forget that brands are built by humans. Flawed humans. I didn't wake up that day planning to become a headline. But you did wake up carrying something, Whoopi replies. Will's eyes flick back to her. Anger, she says plainly. Pressure. Years of swallowing things down because you were supposed to be the bigger man. The audience murmurs again, this time not in shock but recognition. Will's shoulders sag just a little. Yeah, he admits. I did. And that doesn't excuse what happened, Whoopi says quickly. But it does explain why so many people felt shaken. Because it forced them to confront the myth. What myth? Will asks, his tone sharper than before. The myth that success makes you immune to breaking, Whoopi says. The myth that being beloved means you're healed. Applause bursts out before she even finishes the sentence. Will sits back, absorbing it. His eyes glisten again, but this time he doesn't look away. You know, he says quietly, what hurt the most after wasn't the jokes. It wasn't the memes. It was the silence. Whoopi tilts her head. From who? People I thought knew me, Will says. People I'd shown up for. Suddenly gone. A few audience members shake their heads sympathetically. Someone whispers, that's real. And then there were the ones who defended me, Will continues. Loudly. Aggressively. Sometimes in ways that made it worse. Whoopi nods. Because they weren't defending you, she says. They were defending what you represented to them. Will looks at her, something like surprise crossing his face. I hadn't thought of it that way, he admits. That's the burden of being a symbol, Whoopi says. You don't just fall as yourself. You fall as everyone's projection of you. The words settle heavy between them. One of the co-hosts clears her throat gently. Can I ask something? She says. Whoopi glances at her, then nods. You've talked about therapy, the co-host says to Will. About doing the work. But some people feel like the conversation keeps circling back to your pain. And they're asking, where does the harm you caused fit into that? The question slices through the room. Will doesn't answer immediately. He rubs his palms together once, then stills them. That's fair, he says. That's really fair. He looks up, eyes scanning the audience again. This time, there's no defensiveness. Just exhaustion. I hurt people, he says. Not just the person involved. I hurt fans. I hurt colleagues. I hurt young people who looked at me and thought, if he can lose control, what does that mean for me? A beat. And I can't undo that, he continues. All I can do is acknowledge it, over and over, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when I'm tired of hearing my own voice talk about it. Whoopi watches him closely now. Measuring. Weighing. Do you think, she asks, that part of why this still feels unresolved is because the public apology came before the private reckoning? Will stiffens. What do you mean? He asks. I mean, Whoopi says carefully, sometimes the world hears the apology before the person has actually changed. And people can sense that. A sharp intake of breath ripples through the audience. Will's eyes narrow, not in anger, but in concentration. You're asking if I said the right words before I did the real work, he says. I'm asking if you think that's possible, Whoopi replies. Silence again. Thick. Unforgiving. Will closes his eyes for a moment. Yes, he says. The word drops heavy and final. Yes, he repeats. I think I was still in shock. Still trying to control the narrative. Still thinking like a movie star instead of a man who messed up. The audience erupts, not in cheers, but in a low, rolling reaction of surprise and respect. Whoopi leans back slightly. That, she says, is the most honest thing you've said today. Will lets out a shaky laugh. It took me long enough. And that's where the tension comes from, Whoopi continues. People don't want perfection. They want truth. And truth is messy. Slow. Sometimes ugly. Will nods, eyes shining now. He wipes at them quickly, then stops himself, letting the emotion sit there instead of hiding it. I'm still becoming the person I should have been that night, he says. The audience goes quiet again, but this time it's different. Softer. More attentive. And I don't expect forgiveness on a timeline, Will adds. I just hope people can see that I'm not running from it. Whoopi studies him for a long moment. The studio lights reflect faintly in her glasses. Then don't, she says. Don't run. Don't rush. And don't ask people to move faster than they're ready to. Will meets her gaze. Holds it. I won't, he says. As the cameras pull back slightly, capturing the whole table, there's a sense that something fundamental has shifted. Not resolved, not healed, but exposed. The conversation has moved past headlines and into something rawer, riskier. And somewhere in the audience, a woman wipes her eyes. Because whatever side you're on, one thing is undeniable now. This isn't just about one moment anymore. It's about what happens after the moment is over. The studio clock ticks closer to the end of the hour, but no one is watching it anymore. Time has warped inside the view that morning. What was supposed to be a controlled conversation has turned into something heavier, something that refuses to stay neatly boxed between commercial breaks. The cameras roll closer again. Will Smith hasn't moved much since his last words. His shoulders are still slightly hunched forward, as if he's bracing for another wave. Across from him, Whoopi Goldberg sits with her hands folded, her face unreadable. But the room senses she isn't done. You said something just now, Whoopi says, her voice quieter but somehow sharper because of it. You said you're still becoming the person you should have been that night. Will nods. Yeah, That suggests, Whoopi continues, that the man who showed up that night wasn't fully in control of himself. A murmur ripples through the audience again. That man was overwhelmed, Will replies. He was reacting. He wasn't leading himself. And yet, Whoopi says he made a choice. The word choice lands hard. Will exhales slowly. Yes, he did. The silence that follows isn't awkward, it's confrontational. It forces everyone, including Will, to sit with the uncomfortable truth that growth doesn't erase responsibility. One of the co-hosts leans in cautiously. Will, can I ask, when you look back now, what's the first emotion that comes up? Will doesn't answer right away. His eyes drift upward, as if the memory is physically above him. Shame, he says finally. Not embarrassment. Shame. A few audience members nod instinctively. Because embarrassment is about how you look, Will continues. Shame is about who you think you are. Whoopi's gaze softens, but only just. And how did that shame change you? She asks. Will shifts in his chair. His voice lowers. It stripped me, he says. I couldn't hide behind success anymore. I couldn't joke my way out. I had to sit alone with the part of me I'd avoided for years. And did you like what you found? Whoopi asks. A faint, sad smile crosses his face. No, he says. But I needed to meet him. The audience is fully locked in now. No phones. No whispers. Just eyes. Will continues, the words coming faster now, like a dam has cracked. I realized I'd been performing strength my whole life, he says. Being the provider, the protector, the example. But I never learned how to be weak without feeling like I was failing. Whoopi nods slowly. That's a trap a lot of men fall into. And when that pressure explodes, Will adds, it doesn't look like tears. It looks like anger. The room hums with recognition. One of the co-hosts shifts uncomfortably. But Will, she says, some people would argue that explanation risks normalizing behavior that shouldn't be normalized. Will turns toward her. Calm. Direct. I'm not asking anyone to normalize it, he says. I'm asking them to understand it so it doesn't happen again. Whoopi interjects gently. Understanding is not the same as excusing. Exactly, Will agrees. And that line matters. A beat passes. The audience claps briefly, supportive but restrained. Whoopi leans forward again. There's another layer here, she says. You weren't just Will Smith that night. You were Will Smith on the world's biggest stage. Will nods. I know. And millions of people, especially young black men, were watching, Whoopi continues. Some saw validation. Others saw fear. The weight of that sinks deep. How does that sit with you? She asks. Will's jaw tightens. He presses his lips together, fighting emotion. That part, he says quietly, that part keeps me up at night. He pauses, then adds, because I never wanted to be a cautionary tale. A soft wave of reaction moves through the audience. I wanted to be proof that you could rise without losing yourself, he continues. And for a moment, I became proof of the opposite. Whoopi watches him closely now. No interruption. No rescue. So what do you do with that? She asks. Will straightens. You don't run from it, he says. You carry it. You let it humble you. And you let it change how you show up from that point on. Words are easy, Whoopi replies. Patterns are harder. Will nods. I know. Another co-host jumps in, her tone careful but firm. Some critics say your recent appearances feel controlled. Like image repair. The audience murmurs again, this time sharper. Will doesn't flinch. Because they are, he says plainly. Gasps ripple across the room. But not in the way people think, he adds quickly. I'm controlling myself now. Not the narrative. Myself. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. Explain that. I used to walk into rooms expecting love, Will says. Now I walk in prepared for discomfort. I listen more. I talk less. I don't assume forgiveness. A pause. And if someone wants to be angry, he continues, I let them. The audience reacts, some nodding, some skeptical. Whoopi studies him. That's a big shift, she says. But here's the hard part. She leans in. You don't get credit for growth just because you're growing. The words cut clean. Will swallows. I know. You don't get applause for self-reflection, Whoopi continues. You get trust slowly. If at all. Will nods again. I accept that. The audience breaks into applause, this time stronger, more unified. But then something unexpected happens. A woman in the audience stands up. The camera hesitates, then swings toward her. Producers look uneasy, but they let it happen. I just want to say something. the woman says, her voice trembling slightly. I grew up watching you, Will. You were my hero. Will's face tightens instantly. And when that happened, she continues, I felt disappointed, but also confused, because I saw my father in that moment, and my brother, men who never learned how to sit with pain. The studio is silent. I don't know if I forgive you, she says honestly, but I appreciate you sitting here and not pretending it didn't matter. Tears glisten in Will's eyes now, unhidden. Thank you, he says softly. That means more than you know. Whoopi looks out at the audience, then back at Will. This, she says, gesturing gently, is why these conversations matter. She turns to Will again. But let me ask you one last thing, she says. If you could speak to the version of yourself 5 minutes before that moment, what would you say? The question hits like a final test. Will closes his eyes. The room waits. I'd tell him, Will says slowly, that the world doesn't need him to be strong right now. He opens his eyes. It needs him to be still. A hush falls over the studio. No applause. No reaction. Just silence. Thick, reverent, heavy with everything that's been said and everything that hasn't. And as the cameras begin to pull back, as producers signal the final segment is approaching, there's an unshakable sense that this conversation has crossed a line it can't uncross. Not because it exploded, but because it refused to end cleanly. And that, more than any headline, is what will follow Will Smith when he leaves that stage. The final minutes arrive without warning. There's no dramatic music cue, no obvious signal that this is the end. Just a quiet shift in the room, like the air itself realizing something irreversible has happened. The producers gesture subtly from the sidelines. The clock is unforgiving. Daytime television always is. Whoopi sits back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Will Smith remains forward, hands resting on the table, as if standing up too fast might shatter whatever fragile honesty has been built here. Well, one of the co-hosts says gently, almost reverently, we're coming to the end of the show. A ripple of disappointment moves through the audience. No one wants this to stop. Not because it's entertaining, but because it feels unfinished in the most human way possible. Whoopi turns to Will one last time. I don't think anyone here believes this conversation ends today, she says. But I do think people can see something they haven't seen before. She pauses. Not a comeback, she adds. A confrontation. Will nods slowly. With myself, he says. The audience applauds, not thunderous, not celebratory, but deep. Respectful. Earned. As the show signs off, the camera pulls back. The theme music swells softly. Will stands, shaking hands with the co-hosts. When he reaches Whoopi, there's a brief hesitation. Then they embrace. It's not warm. It's not cold. It's real. The moment lasts barely 2 seconds. But it's enough. The screen fades to commercial. And then everything explodes. By the time Will Smith steps outside the studio, his phone is vibrating nonstop. His publicist glances down at her own screen, eyes widening. Twitter, no X, is already ablaze. Clips are everywhere. Whoopi Goldberg doesn't let Will Smith off the hook. Will Smith admits he apologized before doing the work. That silence at the end? Chilling. Hashtags trend within minutes. Hashtag Will on the View. Hashtag Whoopi asks the hard questions. Hashtag accountability over apologies. Some praise him. Others tear him apart. One viral post reads, "This wasn't redemption. This was reality." Another fires back. "Y'all are addicted to punishing people forever." Celebrities weigh in carefully. A-list actors post vague messages about growth and grace. Comedians are less subtle. Late-night writers scramble to rewrite monologues. Morning shows dissect every facial expression, every pause, every breath. Was Will sincere? Was Whoopi too harsh? Was it brave or calculated? Think pieces flood the internet within hours. Psychologists analyze Will's body language. Cultural commentators debate masculinity, fame, and the impossible expectations placed on public figures. Some fans say they finally felt seen. Others say the conversation centered the wrong pain. And in the middle of it all, Will Smith goes silent. No tweets. No Instagram stories. No statements. For the first time in a long time, he lets the conversation exist without trying to steer it. Inside the studio, the audience filters out slowly. Strangers talk to each other like old friends. That was heavy, one woman says, shaking her head. But necessary, another replies. A younger man wipes his eyes, embarrassed but unmoved. I didn't expect that, he mutters. I really didn't. Whoopi returns to her dressing room and closes the door. She sits alone for a moment, staring at her reflection. She's not smiling. She's not frowning. She did what she came to do. And she knows the cost. By evening, the interview has been viewed millions of times. Reaction videos multiply. Some people pause the clip mid-sentence just to analyze the look in Will's eyes when he said the word shame. One comment racks up thousands of likes. This is what accountability actually looks like. Uncomfortable. Incomplete. Ongoing. Another counters. Y'all want blood, not growth. The divide is clear, and it's not going away. Will watches none of it. Instead, he sits alone that night, the noise of the world muted, the echo of Whoopi's words still ringing in his ears. You don't get to decide how people process that change. For the first time, he doesn't try to argue with it. And that's the part no headline quite captures. Because the real aftermath isn't the trending topics. It's the quiet. It's the long road that doesn't come with applause. It's the understanding that some moments don't end with forgiveness or outrage, but with responsibility that lingers long after the cameras stop rolling. And that's why this exchange refuses to fade. Not because it was explosive, but because it was honest. Now, we want to hear from you. Did Will Smith take real accountability, or was this still a controlled attempt at redemption? Was Whoopi Goldberg right to press him the way she did, or did the conversation cross a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read them all. And if you want more intense, cinematic, behind-the-scenes celebrity moments like this, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, hit that like button, and share this story with someone who needs to see it. Because the most powerful moments in entertainment aren't scripted. They're confronted.